Hi everyone, in this video I'm going to mod this cheap PC case by adding a wooden front panel. I'll be using some power tools to save time, but you can do this with minimal tools and cheap materials. To get the best outcome, you should choose a case where the buttons and I/O is not part of the front panel. I didn't have a case like that, so I'll be doing it the hard way by cutting out the I/O panel and building it into the new front panel. Be careful when you cut it out. I accidentally cut the USB cable off. This drywall saw worked extremely well for cutting plastic. I'm starting from scratch with flat timber, but you can buy molding that will already be shaped and the right width, so you don't have to rip it. All you have to do is cut it to the length, which could easily be done by hand or using a miter box. I'll be painting mine, so I didn't cut the ends at 45-degree angles, but keep that in mind if you plan on keeping the wood natural. I used these 3D printed corners from a previous project to align the frame, but it's optional. You can use clamps and a small square to do micro adjustments before the glue is dry. The section for the I/O panel was a bit too wide, so I glued in some tongue depressors to fill the gap. Next I made some slots for horizontal supports that will hold the wooden slats in place. Mine was 10mm and I think it's a bit too wide. Narrower ones will look better and be less obvious. Once again, you don't need a table saw, chisels and files will also do the job. I made a groove around the inside edge to house the fan mesh. But looking back, I'm not sure it was really needed since the mesh is so thin. I think you should be fine just gluing it with Cera glue. If you use molding, you won't need to add this slanted profile to the front panel, but if you didn't, you can use a table saw or a hand plane or even sanding paper on a straight edge, but it will take longer. So that is the front frame construction done. Now it's just filling the gaps and sanding it. I'm planning on spray painting the front panel, so I'm sanding up to 240 grit. If you are painting it by hand or keeping the wood natural, 120 grit will be fine. It's not a table, no one will be touching it. I cut some 10mm wide slats from Tasmanian oak, but again you can buy molding that is the correct width and shape already. Because they're so small, it didn't really work well sanding them with the orbital sander. I tried gluing some sandpaper to a flat surface, but I kept on sanding my fingers. So I made a jig from scraps to hold the slats in place for sanding. The case had some screws in the front that was preventing the front panel from being flush with the front of the case. I used a rotary tool to cut some indents for the screws, but you can achieve the same result with a small chisel. It'll just take longer. I asked ChatGPT which colors will be complementary and which ones will be contrasting with the color of the case. The first two colors came from that list, but I ended up using the third one just because I had it lying around. I'm going to airbrush it, but a brush or rattle spray can will also work. This is ordinary house paint, so it's too thick to spray straight out of the container, so I ended up diluting it 50% with distilled water. I didn't use primer, so I had to apply more layers. I ended up with 4 layers, but with primer you should be able to get away with just 2 layers. Remember to give it a slight sanding after the first layer, since the wood fibers will lift up a bit. Or you can wet the wood slightly and sand it before applying the first layer. I just forgot to do that. I usually apply beeswax to my cases, but in this case I sprayed the slats with matte acrylic floor polish since it's cheap, and it worked to provide protection against scratches, but it didn't make the grain pop like wax usually does. So if I do this again, I'd rather use wax. I also gave the back one layer of paint. If you don't, you will see the wood when viewing from the side or slightly behind. I applied the same acrylic matte floor polish to the paint to protect it from scratches. I'm not sure this will work with a brush, since it will dissolve the paint layer underneath while applying it, but you can buy clear coat in a spray rattle can as well. Previously I tried a hairdryer to flatten the fan mesh, which comes in rolls, but it was too hot and warped the mesh, so this time I'm trying a new technique by covering the mesh with a metal sheet and then heating it up. It worked much better, but I still made it a little bit too hot and there was a slight warping in the mesh, but you can barely see it. I used some scrap wood to space out the wooden slats and keep them in place while gluing, but I applied too much CA glue on the first two slats and it ended up gluing to the spacers I used. I glued the mesh in place with UV activated epoxy since it sets quickly, but I think hot glue or CA glue will also work. But it will take more effort to keep the mesh in place while drying. Also make sure not to apply too much glue or it will run out the front. I cannot emphasize enough how much time you will save by choosing a case with the I/O separate from the front panel. I had to perform some surgery on the case to get the cables to fit, especially the USB was in the way. The case had some holes that I thought would be perfect for screwing the front panel to the case, but that turned out to be a very bad idea. It was very difficult to reach the holes from inside the case. It will also be very difficult to remove the front panel if I want to change the fans or something. It came out pretty good. Even the buttons and I/O looks like it should be there.